Nuclear weapons plans in the new gangster state of Ukraine coming up.
Ukraine's new coalition calls officially for, quote, preemptive nuclear strikes. Governors on the international wanted list. And the sordid past of the new oligarch president.
Pensions halved to $3 a day, heating costs doubled, forced sell-off of the country's land and resources, all part of IMF, quote, knee breakers imposed around the world, now in Ukraine. In a bombshell announcement ignored by mainstream media, even the IMF itself now admits austerity doesn't work. Cuts and economic slumps are vicious circles. Let's speak to leading economist and author Professor Michael Hudson. Great to talk to you. So why are Ukraine's new oligarch leaders doing this?
There was a Chilean-type military coup d'etat there. The people of Ukraine do not sign off on the IMF IOUs and sign the transfer of property. The coup d'etat leaders in Kiev signed up, and what do they want? Their aim is not to help Ukraine. Their aim is to get rich for themselves and to move as much of their money into London, New York, and other centers as they can.
To run Ukraine, Assistant Secretary of State Vic Nuland appointed the Fatherland Party, led by Yulia Tymoshenko.
Because the money was being siphoned off by Lazarenko and Tymoshenko, Ukraine at that time, as they have today, ran up a huge gas debt.
Tymoshenko's business partner, Pavel Lazarenko, has served 6 years for stealing huge sums from the public as the pair ran vast gas transit monopoly United Energy Systems.
You could characterize her as an unindicted co-conspirator.
Documentary Stealing Popcorn notes U.S. political protection keeps her clear of those massive criminal charges to this day.
So we know that the political interests of the United States government at the highest level probably didn't want Yulia Tymoshenko drawn into the Lazarenko case.
WikiLeaks cables from the U.S. Embassy state, quote, oligarch Tymoshenko has stolen vast sums from Ukraine and hid them in London to pretend she wasn't involved in business. BBC reports she was wanted for alleged involvement in the murders of the head of Ukraine's National Bank, members of parliament, as well as business rivals. This is her on Interpol's international most wanted list. Tymoshenko denies the claims, and her campaign slogan is, quote, fighting the oligarchs, unless she means her alleged hits on rival billionaires. George Washington University reports the slogan causes, quote, epic laughter, and notes Ukrainians shout Varovka, Mrs. Thief, to her face. Let's talk to former U.S. intelligence officer Scott Rickard. Really great to see you. Is U.S. still protecting Ukraine's criminals?
Certainly, they're protecting them, and they're bolstering them. They're putting them in a position where they can basically control the financial outcome of Ukraine, hiding the money in Isle of Man, hiding in the Cayman Islands, and then Cyprus, and working with the Western oligarchs to launder money. Poroshenko's right in bed with the right guys.
Tymoshenko's party has been joined in power by this man as the country's president, or as the U.S. ambassador to Kiev in a leaked cable admitted, disgraced oligarch. Weapons, prostitutes, drugs, these are the things Poroshenko is associated with in Ukraine, claims investigative reporter Greg Collada, adding Poroshenko's not self-made, as claimed by mainstream media. He got rich by, quote, plundering state property with armed gangs with his convict father, who was jailed for large-scale theft of state property. Indie media describes Poroshenko as the most corrupt person in Ukraine, in a country branded by a former State Department official the global epicenter of badness. Being the most corrupt is some achievement. But disgraced oligarchs can do what they like, writes the SCF Foundation, as long as they carry out White House orders. Leaked cables reveal secret meetings before the coup with the US ambassador, other top officials, as well as Mrs. Clinton, where among various instructions she told him the quickest ways to steal Ukraine into NATO membership. If previous administrations made at least some pretense of being for the public, Ukraine is now literally a government of the oligarchs, by the oligarchs, for the oligarchs. 18 of the country's 24 regions have had oligarchs and cronies parachuted into power by the new regime. Igor Kolomoisky, the, quote, head of the Ukrainian Mafia, the US put in charge of an extremely sensitive eastern region. He owns Ukraine banks, metals, resources, food, transport, military and oil industry. The multi-billionaire has a fetish for gold statues, notes Ukraine Business Insight, and lives in Switzerland. Quote, looting of state property, bribes and murdering rivals were part and parcel of becoming an oligarch in the global epicenter of badness. Their appointment to actually run the country has now blown everything into the open.
И завтра первыми будут искать все твои близкие, потому что мы будем вешать прямо на площади. За твою голову тебе дают большие деньги, $1 миллион за твою, да. Будут искать везде.
The newly appointed oligarch was recorded putting an alleged hit on a presidential candidate and his family in eastern Ukraine. In another leaked call, an official reveals Kolomoisky is also behind the Odessa massacre, the deadliest attack so far in Ukraine's civil war, where he paid Nazis from the infamous Right Sector Party that burnt, slaughtered and strangled dozens of civilians to death, including elderly women. In a fairly predictable development, handing state power to an oligarch and criminal suspect has turned him, quote, crazy. Kolomoisky has his own private army and set up the Azov Battalion of openly Nazi mercenaries, which London's Sunday Times admits is behind the bloodshed that has caused revulsion among the population. He's now been placed on the international wanted list sent to Interpol in connection with banned means and methods of warfare, aggravated murder and abductions in eastern Ukraine, all in a few months since he was put in power. Leading intelligence author William Engdahl's investigated post-coup Ukraine. He finds what's happened is, quote, so astonishing as almost to defy belief. Dr. Engdahl joins us. Really great to speak to you. Why do you write US policies have put gangsters and murderers in Ukraine in power?
I've already seen reports that the government has signed over the pipeline, the gas pipeline distribution network. They've signed that off to Chevron, but German companies have grabbed metallurgical assets in eastern Ukraine and coal assets, extremely prized coal assets there. So they're already looting the crown jewels of Ukraine, and the you know, the, I don't know what you want to call it, the puppet regime that's sitting in Kiev is doing their bidding. Now you've got a chocolate king as president. You had his opponent was the gas queen, Timoshenko, Julia Timoshenko, who looted billions from her fellow countrymen, and is associated with figures of organized crime. So you've got a bunch of gangsters, essentially, and Nazi thugs running Ukraine, and that is hardly a stable thing for peace in Europe. Germany wants to go to war to defend a bunch of Nazis in Kiev because they get hot-headed and start creating incidents with Russia? I don't think so, but they better realize that that's the agenda that some people in Washington have, because they want not the American people, not the United States, but this tiny power cabal that has so much power in Washington. They want not only a new Cold War, they want a new hot war. That's a pretty dangerous thing to be playing around with. This is an escalation toward a new dimension of horror for mankind.
Timoshenko revealed her real oligarch face in a leaked call pledging to nuke the eastern part of Ukraine.
Что теперь делать оставшимся 8 миллионам русских, которые остались на территории Украины?
Их расстреливать из атомного оружия.
The openly Nazi Svoboda party, led by Oleg Tagnibok, was rewarded for its appalling violence during the coup, with 6 major cabinet posts, including security chief in charge of Ukraine's armed forces. Svoboda's official manifesto calls for building nuclear weapons again in Ukraine and preemptive nuclear strikes without declaring war. In other words, open and supreme violation of international statutes. Gunmen from Ukraine's other big Nazi coalition, Right Sector, were caught attempting to break into Ukraine's largest nuclear power plant.
The neo-Nazis are paying regular reconnaissance visits to nuclear power stations with obvious intent to hold the whole world hostage. They have paid visits to bacteriological laboratories and, according to the people working there, got hold of bacteriological material that can be used for biological warfare. Other terrorists have merely been dreaming of such weapons, Ukrainian ones, with the connivance of or on direct orders from someone in the junta, may actually use them to Senator McCain's delight.
Turkey is reportedly in talks with Ukraine's new rulers to buy the project documentation for one of the world's most powerful nuclear strategic weapons, the intercontinental ballistic missile NATO calls Satan. Governments are now voicing concern that Kiev may be violating the International Missile Technology Control Treaty and the Hague Code of Conduct against ballistic missile proliferation. Having, quote, gangsters and murderers in charge is unlikely to end well for Ukraine, when that country also has nuclear weapons technology with plans to use them. It's an international threat. Seek truth from facts. This is The Truth Seeker.